Okay. So last time we were learning about the Mongolians. We learned about their territory, we learned about the military, and we learned about some of their leaders. And now we're going to talk about the dynasties. So go ahead and make a bullet and write down Yuan dynasties. Now we're going to learn a little bit about their dynasty. So make a bullet and write down Yuan dynasty. So the Mongolians had taken over southern China. And after they had taken over southern China, the Yuan dynasty then proceeds to do a couple of improvements in China. So just like we've seen always with every single dynasty, is that first things go pretty good. And for the Yuan dynasty, one of the first things that ends up happening, make a 1, write down greatly improves roads, communication, and trade. So 1 greatly improves road, communication, and trade. So the roads end up getting improved. So the roads end up getting improved. The communication ends up getting improved. Like the way how they did communication was that they would have a relay of horses. So you would have a person on a horse and they would have a message and they would ride like 20 miles. They would then switch off to another rider. So on a new rider, new horse, they would ride 20 miles, so forth and so on. So they kind of moved the messages along like a relay, and that allowed messages to move along quicker in China. They also improved in trade as well. So trade was also improved as well along the Silk Road. So that also happened. One of the major things that also ends up happening is that the length of the Grand Canal ends up getting extended. So I'm going to make it 2. 2 extend the length of the Grand Canal by hundreds of miles. So 2 extended the length of the Grand Canal by hundreds of miles. So the Grand Canal also gets its length extended quite a bit. So it also gets extended quite a bit. And the Grand Canal was constructed, it goes to Beijing, so the Grand Canal goes to Beijing. And the Grand Canal is just a big man-made waterway that goes to Beijing. So it's a big man-made waterway for bringing water into the city and for bringing that water not only to the city, but also to bring it out to the farmlands around the city. It also allowed boat travel to go further into the interior parts of China as well. Now, the Grand Canal does bring water pretty consistently to Beijing. It does end up drying up at one point in time at the end of the Ming Dynasty, which we haven't gotten to yet, but it does end up drying up in kind of the late 1700s. There was a kind of a mini ice age that we go through, and that causes the water in the area not to be there, and that causes some issues. But we'll talk about that more in the future. Make it 3. And write down improved trade routes linking China with India and Persia. So we did talk about earlier about how they improved the trade routes. And another trade route that they also improved as well was the routes linking China with India and Persia. All right, so they also improved those going out to those areas. Persia, if you don't quite know where that is, that's modern day Iran. So that's what Persia is. So it's kind of modern day Iran area. And then India is on the opposite side of the Himalayan mountains from China. So for China to get its trade to India, it either went by boat or it went through the northern passes of the Himalayas. So on the north side for the desert, and then it would go around kind of that way and then down into India. Okay. So we already talked about how they would switch off riders every so often. So it looks like they would switch off riders every 25 miles. So every 25 miles, they would switch off riders there. There were some problems, obviously, with the Mongolians taking over because when the Mongolians were in charge of China, the people that paid taxes were the North Chinese and South Chinese, while Mongolians and people from Central Asia didn't pay any taxes. And that became a pretty big problem because obviously those harsh taxes led to the population of China not being very happy with the Mongolians who were in charge. All right, make a new bullet and write down Silk Road. So new bullet, Silk Road. So the Silk Road ends up being, it's not an actual like road. Silk Road just means the trade routes that people would use to bring silk from Europe, or sorry, from China over to Europe. So when we talk about Silk Road, we just mean all the trade that's going from Europe to China and from China to Europe. There's no one particular road. That probably would have made things a bit easier. But instead, it's the just ways in which people would try to get to China or to Europe for trade. Now, one of the people that moved on the Silk Road quite a bit was Marco Polo. Let's go ahead and make it one. Marco Polo was a famous Italian merchant and explorer. So he's a famous Italian merchant and explorer. He's from the city of Venice. Venice at this time period was an independent nation, so he would have been a Venetian. So even though Venice is part of modern day Italy, at the time period, Venice was an independent nation that was mainly based on trade. And Marco Polo is a pretty famous merchant who went to China. Why is he famous for? Well, he's famous because he wrote a book about his journey to China that he called Journey to Cathay. Cathay just meant China. So that's why he's famous for, because he wrote a book about it and a whole bunch of people bought the book. I'm going to make it 2 and write down travel to China. So 2, travel to China. So Marco Polo did travel to China, and as that he wrote a book, and that's why he was famous for. Now, what does the so a lot of times people ask me, well, hey, Mr. Fur, how the game Marco Polo, how did that kind of get going? Well, what ends up happening is that when Marco Polo was traveling through the desert, the Gobi Desert with his father, there was a sandstorm. And when that sandstorm happened, Marco Polo ends up getting separated from his father. When he gets separated from his father is calling out Marco, to which every time Marco Polo responds, Polo. So his dad would call out Marco, and then Marco Polo would call his last name Polo. And they kept on doing that until they found each other. Now, I realize that in the game Marco Polo, you play in water, and the goal is to stay away from the person. The reason why the game started be playing in water is because Venice, the city that Marco Polo is from, is an island nation off of Italy. So that's why it's played in water for, because it's an island. So, there you go. That's kind of how the game came around. And so it was kind of just based off this story about how Marco was trying to find his father, and it's played in the water because the city of Venice is well on the water. This right here, this shows you kind of the route that Marco Polo took to get over to China. So you kind of see how he started over in Venice. So Venice is right here. So that's the city he started in, because that's where he's from. So he goes south, and then at one point in time, he went south and then he went down here. So he kind of took a boat. So took a boat from Venice, went down here, down to Jerusalem. Then he came into like Central Asia, into Iraq area, went down through Iran, into Afghanistan, then traveled this way through the Gobi Desert and such, over to China. And eventually, as you kind of see, he explored some other areas inside China, and then he kind of headed back, going by water. So there's a couple of different routes that you can take, but this kind of shows you one of the routes. So there, you can go the water route here. So you can travel through here and then go down here and then travel by water. You can travel over land here. There's another way that you can go. You travel land kind of going up here. So you kind of go up and then over this way. So there's a couple of different routes that you can take to get to China. Make a 3 and write down increase European contacts. So increase European contacts. What I mean by that is that as Europeans were coming over to China to get silk and so forth in the trade, they were increasing contact with the Europeans. They were having an increase in contact between the two groups. And then make a 4. And for 4, we're going to write down exchange of ideas. So 4, exchange of ideas. And the exchange of ideas was pretty important, more so for the Europeans, because they end up learning about gunpowder weapons, end up learning about the compass, end up learning about the printing press. And eventually those things became pretty important in Europe because they kind of further developed a lot of those technologies. So that increase in contact or exchange of ideas really kind of helped out the Europeans in kind of catching up with technology and kind of learning about a couple of things that they didn't know about. Eventually, the Chinese and Mongol relations, they start to do or go pretty bad, mainly because of a lot of the harsh taxes and laws that the Mongols had on the Chinese. Gonna make a bullet and write down Chinese-Mongol relations. So bullet Chinese-Mongol relations. Then once you have bullet Chinese-Mongol relations written down, then make a 1 and write down unequal treatment, harsh taxes, and laws. So unequal treatment, harsh taxes, and laws. So the Chinese citizenry of the Yuan dynasty wasn't really treated the same way as the Mongols. They had higher taxes. Laws were pretty unfair to them. They just weren't treated really the same way that the Mongols were. The civil service program that China used to have, in which you would take a test and then you'd be part of the government, that no longer existed. So if you were Chinese, you could no longer hold a government office. So that was a problem. So there were a couple of issues. All right, let's go ahead and stop there.